We definitely do. So I'm pretty lucky in that I get to work on a lot of sexy topics. I think I started working on like employment branding back in 1999 when it wasn't even really a term that people were talking about. And I don't think there's been a topic in my career that is sexier to me than this particular topic. This is the biggest, hairiest, messiest business problem we will ever have to tackle in our lifetime. And there's been a lot of terms that have come out today, so things like cognitive surplus, self-organization. Susan was talking about the preferences of the workforce. Nobody's really talked about the necessity of the business, the ability of the business to be agile, and more importantly, the ability of the organization to contain costs. Anybody have an idea of what the largest segment of cost is in an organization? People. And what percentage of that spend do you think is wasted? 30%. Average right now, from the research that we're doing, is about 37% of all dollars spent on labor are wasted. Why are they wasted? One, we have this archaic concept called jobs. Okay? So I'm a manager. I've got work that I need to get done. I organize it into this thing called a job. Then I go out into this labor market and I try to find somebody that fits that job. Help me. How likely is it that you're going to like everything that I want you to do in that job? Not very. How likely is it he's going to be uber productive when it comes to those things he doesn't like to do? Not very likely, right? So I'm actually wasting salary dollars when I'm paying you to do something that you don't enjoy. Okay, so we know that the job model doesn't necessarily fit how we do work today. How many of you work in an organization that has outsourced some aspect of their business? Okay. For those of you who didn't, I'm assuming you all have print shops in-house and you still do your own printing. When you need to install network systems, you do it yourself because you have your own IT technicians and you don't hire service providers to come in and do that. Everybody outsources. Everybody. Okay. How many of you use consultants in your business? Okay. How about contractors? How about temporary labor? Okay. So if I come to you and I ask you from a headcount perspective, what percentage of your organization is contingent? What do you include in that number? What does the average organization include in that number? Contractors and temps. That's it. Contractors and temps. So from a headcount perspective, if we took, let's take 15 of the Fortune 200 on average. Choose any 15 you want. If you analyze their headcount, what you're going to find is that, on average, 28% of their workforce is temporary in nature. It's contingent. They're either contractors or they're temporary workers. 72% are regular employees. Keep in mind, that's the original definition of contingent labor. But do service providers work alongside employees in the business? Do they share cubicle space on your physical plants? Are they dealing with your people on a day-to-day basis? Yes? No? Anyone? Sometimes. In many cases, absolutely, they are. So there's those relationship between the service providers as well. So if we include service providers and consultants, here's what that same breakdown looks like when we look at what we spend on labor versus when we count heads. Okay. If we go back into those same 15 companies, 31.7% of the workforce is a service provider, not an employee. 6.3% of that workforce are consultants. 26.1% of the workforce are contractors or temporary labor. Anybody doing the math in their head? What percentage is left? 36% of the workforce are regular employees. When you expand the scope of contingent labor to include service providers and consultants. We're past that tipping point where a majority of the organization is an employee. So we can talk about culture, but do you really get to manage the culture when 60% of your workforce are non-employees? Does it make sense that that's the right discussion to be having? So we've talked about preferences of the workforce and we've talked about demand of the organization. And we've talked about salary waste, and I want you to keep that salary waste number in mind. So if I do away with this whole concept of jobs, and instead I start to break things up into much smaller projects? Can I give you only the projects, the type of work that you enjoy? Absolutely. So if I can break it up and I can get him to work on only the things that he enjoys, where he's going to be uber productive with regards to those things because they relate to his skill set and he enjoys them, I can find somebody else who enjoys doing the types of things that you didn't do. So now I can recover that 35 to 37% salary waste. How much does an organization like IBM spend on labor? Millions? Hundreds of millions? Billions? Is 35% of $4 billion enough to make it a business issue worth fighting? Absolutely, right? Absolutely, for those of you who know. So my question comes back to it. If we look at that distribution, and we know that's the case, does it make sense that we as an organization continue to force managers to deal with a fragmented infrastructure for securing labor? Where do managers go when they need help establishing a relationship with a third-party service provider? They go to HR, sometimes. In some organizations, they go to procurement. In other organizations, they have to work through their legal department. In a major corporation, the average hiring manager has to work with all three just to get the labor to accomplish their work. And because of that fragmented nature, where in the process of planning their business are they saying, does it make sense that I still have Chris doing this job? Or should I break this job up into 2 contract jobs because I'm going to be phasing out one set of skill sets that relates to something that Chris is doing? Or does it make sense for us to continue to do this when service providers now have a model that enables a much better cost efficiency with regards to doing this work? We're not, on a regular basis, reevaluating how we accomplish work because the infrastructure that we've built to procure the labor to accomplish work is too complex. We've pushed that complexity off onto the hiring manager when the complexity should exist at the resource provider perspective. To Susan's term, you called it a talent broker. Talent broker who's responsible for finding talent in the organization. So what's preventing us from doing that? How many of you think your senior leaders think this is a key issue for their organization? How many of you think that they think it's a key issue for their organization? Somebody throw out a percentage. 5%? Actually, 95% of EVPs and SVPs of HR will admit this is a key issue. Here's the more important question. What percentage of them do you think are doing anything about it? You're pretty close. Our research right now is showing 12% of organizations are actively trying to reinvent how they procure labor through the organization. 12% of organizations are actually tackling this issue. So we have a question?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I drink the Kool-Aid. I'm absolutely with you. I am part of the contingent workforce. I'm a consultant. You happen to be speaking in a state where the legislation is very difficult.
Yep.
I have a friend who is a consultant, and she just lost her job. She doesn't want benefits. She doesn't want to work full-time, but they can't hire her back as a consultant. Can you talk a little bit to that, and is that one of the reasons only 12% are working on this? Is it a legislation issue?
It is first, it is a big, hairy beast of a problem. And you have a lot of people in leadership roles who only plan to be in those leadership roles for a short period of time. They don't want to tackle a big, hairy beast of an issue because there's a lot of potential to look bad on this big, hairy beast of an issue. The second issue that really prevents a barrier here is how we collect taxes in the United States. The vast majority of income that our federal government and our state governments receive are done through payroll deductions. If we convert to a mass contractor model, the ability to collect those payments is more challenging from a governmental perspective. So there is most certainly a protectionist agenda in preventing a large portion of the workforce from embracing this model. Is it going to stop us from embracing this new model? No. The preferences are there on the workforce, and the numbers are there. The businesses need the agility. They need to kill off the salary waste, but the numbers are there. So in 2000, we're going back 10 years, spend on temporary labor in the US was $68 billion. In 2005, it had grown to $82 billion. In 2010, it's $112 billion. That's just temporary labor. That's not consultants. That's not service providers. Has the use of outsourcing grown or shrank? It's grown. So it's doubled. Absolutely. So the spend is increasing, the model is being embraced, and essentially what we're doing is we're in a state where, yes, there are laws. Yes, many HR practitioners complain about, what is the word that they use? It's a word I hate, so I don't say it. It starts with a C. Help me. What does HR do in many organizations? What do they try to do? They force compliance. Hate that word. Hate that word. So the vast majority of organizations are finding ways to ignore it. I can create the reports. I can show the government that I'm somewhat compliant. But when I want to hire your friend, and I can't do it as a contractor, why can't I hire as a contractor through my unit in Malaysia? The Malaysian government doesn't care where she sits. So one Fortune 100 company has created an offshore operations center in the Caribbean. And when they want to hire people via a contract relationship that doesn't float really well in the US, they hire them through that unit. They get paid in that currency, the contract sits, but that government doesn't care where the employee sits. Does that make sense? Business will always find a way to do what business needs to do, regardless of what the government wants to do from a protectionist standpoint. So, as service providers, this is my question back to all of you. What do we have to start doing in the recruiting profession to make one-stop sourcing of talent and one-stop sourcing of labor possible in our organizations? What do we have to start doing? Let's discuss it. Who has ideas? Somebody has to have ideas. China, what's your perspective?
Well, my guess is that my guess is that these are pretty startling statistics, and my guess is that most CEOs don't know those numbers, right? And so it would be incumbent upon HR leadership to make sure that they did and start to come with some plans. That it's huge. It's a huge opportunity for an organization. And study after study says that whether you believe them or not, that CEOs really get it, that the issue that's the most crushing, the most important is talent and talent management today, and even more urgently moving forward. That kind of data, you can't look away from. HR can't look away from it. Business leadership can't look away from it.
It's absolutely startling. So Jerry's not here, but Jerry and the Future of Talent have also done similar research to us. And what we can tell you is less than 1 in 10 organizations claims that they can tell you what they have with regards to contingent labor. And you want to know the #1 source they're using to estimate? It's not payroll. It's not procurement contracts. It has nothing to do with HR. They're going to their security department and asking, how many badges have you issued to contractors? Because we have no other way to come back with that number. How embarrassing is it in this day and age, with all the technology that sits in our functions, we can't answer that very basic question? Does that speak real well to the professionalism of our profession?